The wind howled through the battlefield, carrying the scent of blood and burning wreckage. Darius Kane stood his ground, his sharp gaze locked onto Queen Valis. She was unlike the Xylari warriors he had faced before. Her stance was confident, her presence commanding. The air between them was thick with tension. Valis took another step forward, her golden eyes gleaming with challenge. "You have killed hundreds of my warriors," she said, her voice steady. "Yet you still stand alone." Darius gave a small shrug. "If you keep sending them, I'll keep cutting them down." The guards behind Valis tensed, their hands tightening around their weapons, but she lifted a hand, halting them. "You think yourself invincible?" she asked. "No," Darius replied. "Just better." A slow smirk formed on Valis' lips. For the first time in years, she felt something close to excitement. She reached behind her, drawing her twin energy blades. The weapons hummed with power, their edges glowing faintly in the dim light. "Then fight me, human," she said. "Let me see if the legends are true." Darius sighed, rolling his shoulders. "You really want to do this?" Valis moved like lightning, her blade slashing toward him in a blur of motion. Darius barely dodged, tilting his head just in time. The air burned where her blade had passed. She was fast, faster than any Xylari he had faced, but not fast enough. Darius twisted, countering with a strike of his own. Valis blocked it with ease, their weapons clashing in a burst of sparks. She smirked. "Not bad." "Neither are you," Darius admitted. They moved again, a dance of death. Blades flashed, feet shifted, and every strike was calculated. Valis was strong, but Darius was relentless. He didn't fight like the Xylari. He didn't rely on brute force or predictable patterns. He adapted. With a sudden move, Darius feinted left, then spun, his blade aiming for her exposed side. Valis barely blocked in time, her arm numb from the impact. She gritted her teeth. This was no ordinary human. "You're not fighting to kill," she realized, stepping back. Darius flicked his blade to the side, shaking off sparks. "You're not my real enemy," he said. "Not yet." Valis narrowed her eyes. He was holding back. This man, this legend, had chosen not to enter. Her heartbeat thundered. Why? For the first time, she questioned everything she had been taught. Perhaps humans were not just warriors. Perhaps they were something more. Queen Valis stood on the balcony of her palace, gazing out over the Xylari capital. The grand city stretched beneath her, a sea of lights and towering structures. It was a testament to the power and might of her people. But now there was something more in her heart, something she had never felt before. Hope. She had sent the message to Darius Kane, inviting him to the heart of the Xylari Empire. The human warrior who had defeated her, who had shown her that strength was not just about power, but also about understanding. It had taken every ounce of courage for her to make that decision. The Xylari Empire had always been built on fear. They ruled through domination, crushing anyone who dared to stand against them. But Darius had taught her a lesson that shook the very foundation of everything she had ever known. True power was in choosing mercy, in choosing peace. Valis turned as General Varuk entered the room, his face a mask of concern. "My queen," Varuk began, his voice low. "Are you sure about this? The council, the warriors, they will not understand." "I understand that," Valis replied, her voice calm but firm. "But this is the way forward. We cannot keep living in the past, ruling through fear." Varuk hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. "The humans, will they accept this? After everything that has happened, do you truly believe they will come here in peace?" Valis looked out at the horizon, the setting sun casting an orange glow across the city. She had no answers, no certainty, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to have all the answers. Darius had shown her that there was strength in uncertainty, in finding new paths. "They will come," Valis said softly. "They have to." A few days later, Darius Kane arrived. The transport ship descended slowly through the atmosphere, its engines roaring as it touched down at the palace grounds. The air was thick with anticipation. The Xelari gathered in the streets, whispering amongst themselves. A human, an outsider, was coming to their land, to their home. Velas stood at the steps of the palace, her heart racing. She had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. Darius stepped off the ship, his armor gleaming in the light of the setting sun. He was as imposing as ever, but there was something different about him. There was no arrogance in his steps, no challenge in his eyes. He had come as a partner, not a conqueror. When he saw Velas, he stopped. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was an understanding between them. "You came," Velas said, a slight smile forming on her lips. "I promised you," Darius replied. "You showed me a different way, and I'm here to see if we can make it work." Velas nodded. "This is the beginning of something new for both our peoples." And in that moment, Velas knew the old empire was gone. What stood before her now was something entirely new, something that could one day be better. Together, humans and Xelari could forge a future of cooperation, understanding, and strength beyond what either of them had ever known. And for the first time in her life, Queen Velas was certain of one thing. This was just the beginning. The wind had died down, and the battlefield was eerily still. The Xelari warriors who had once moved with confidence now stood in a tense silence, watching their queen and the human warrior. Velas had never felt so uncertain. She had always prided herself on being the strongest, the most skilled. But this human, this Darius Kane, had exposed her vulnerabilities in ways no one ever had before. She had fought him with everything she had, yet he had shown her mercy, a mercy she was not used to. Darius stood off to the side, wiping the blood from his blade. He hadn't killed her when he could have. He hadn't finished the job. Why? Velas couldn't understand it. She had been ready to strike, to take control, but instead, he had stopped. As the silence stretched on, she found herself wondering something she had never wondered before. What was he waiting for? "Darius," she called, her voice steady, though beneath the surface, something was shifting. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Queen Velas. Why didn't you kill me?" The question slipped from her lips before she could stop it. Darius's gaze softened for a brief moment, and for the first time, Velas saw the human behind the warrior. "You are a leader," he said simply. "And I don't kill leaders, not unless I have no other choice." Velas blinked, stunned by the simplicity of his answer. Leaders. She had spent her entire life fighting to be the greatest leader that Xelari had ever known. And yet, here was a human, someone who had every reason to see her as an enemy, treating her with respect. Why? Velas found herself asking, more to herself than to him. Darius paused before answering, his voice quiet but firm. "Because I've learned that killing doesn't make me stronger, it makes me weaker. We're all part of something bigger. Victory means nothing if it destroys everything else." His words lingered in the air like a heavy cloud. Velas was no stranger to war and the sacrifices it required. But this was something she had never considered. Darius wasn't just fighting for glory or domination. He fought because he had to, but also because he believed in something more. Velas felt a strange tug at her chest. He was right. She had spent her life conquering, ruling, and taking without a second thought. But what had it led to? Fear, hatred, destruction. Was this the path she wanted to continue down? Was it worth it? "I could kill you now," Velas said, her voice colder than she intended. "You are my enemy, after all." Darius met her gaze without flinching. "You could, but you won't." Velas stared at him for a long moment, a strange mixture of admiration and confusion swirling in her mind. He had given her mercy, and in doing so, he had shown her something she had never seen in herself. "Why not?" Velas asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Darius smiled faintly, lowering his weapon. "Because I'm not here to be your enemy. I'm here to show you that we can be better. We don't have to destroy everything to survive." For the first time, Velis felt a shift deep within her. This human, this warrior, had shown her a new way to look at the universe, a way that didn't depend on fear or destruction. And for the first time in her life, Velis didn't know what would happen next. The battlefield was silent, except for the crackling flames and the distant echoes of the fallen. Darius Kane stood alone, his blade dripping with Silari blood. His breathing was steady, his stance unwavering. The bodies of 50 elite warriors lay around him, defeated with terrifying efficiency. From above, Queen Velis watched in disbelief. She had ruled the Silari Empire for decades, leading wars, conquering planets, and crushing rebellions without hesitation. She had faced countless enemies, but never had she seen one man stand against an army and win. This was not a myth. This was real. Her golden eyes narrowed as she stepped forward on the command deck of her warship. She was no coward. If she wanted answers, she would take them herself. "Prepare my guard," she ordered. "I will face this human myself." Varrok's eyes widened. "My queen, that is." "Not a request," Velis snapped, her voice cold. Minutes later, the Silari dropship descended, its engines roaring as it landed a short distance from Darius. The doors hissed open, and from the darkness, Velis emerged. She was tall, draped in elegant yet battle-ready armor, dark metal forged with symbols of her lineage. Her golden eyes glowed with a dangerous light, and her movements were as fluid as a predator stalking its prey. Behind her, 10 royal guards followed, weapons drawn, their expressions unreadable. Darius did not move. He simply watched, calculating. Velis stepped forward, stopping just a few meters from him. She studied him, the blood-stained armor, the scars peeking from beneath his gear, the calm in his stance. This man had no fear. "You are Darius Kane," she said, her voice carrying an air of authority. Darius tilted his head slightly. "And you are the Silari Queen," he replied, his voice rough, yet strangely composed. A smirk played at Velis' lips. He did not kneel. He did not bow. Every other species had feared her presence. But this human. He met her gaze without hesitation. "I expected a monster," she said, stepping closer, "but I see only a man." Darius wiped the blade on his sleeve, sheathing it. "Monsters are made," he said simply. "Your people made me one." Velis narrowed her eyes. "You speak as if we are the enemy." "You are," Darius said, matter-of-factly. "And yet, you're still standing." A flicker of something crossed her expression. Intrigue, perhaps even admiration. Her fingers curled into fists. For the first time in her reign, she was uncertain. She had dismissed humans as myths. And yet, one stood before her, alive, unbroken, and unafraid. The Silari warship hovered over the battlefield, its dark metal reflecting the burning wreckage below. Inside, Queen Velis watched from a high command platform, her golden eyes scanning the destruction. Her best soldiers lay dead, their lifeless bodies scattered like broken dolls. The air was thick with smoke, and the stench of burning flesh filled the sky. She clenched her fists. "Where is he?" she demanded. General Varrok, standing beside her, hesitated before pointing at the battlefield below. "There, my queen." Velis followed his gaze. The lone figure stood among the dead, a human. He was tall and armored in dark, battle-worn gear. His face was hidden behind a cracked visor, but his posture was relaxed, almost as if he was unbothered by the dozens of Silari corpses surrounding him. Velis felt a cold chill run down her spine. This was the warrior, the one who had slaughtered hundreds of her best soldiers. One man. "Impossible," she whispered. Darius Kane stood motionless, his weapon resting at his side. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He was waiting. Velis gritted her teeth. "Deploy the next wave. I want him dead." At her command, 50 of her elite warriors descended from the ship, their blades humming with energy, their armor gleaming under the blood-red sky. Darius finally moved. Slowly, deliberately. He raised his weapon, a brutal energy rifle, and fired. One shot, one kill. An auxiliary warrior collapsed, his armor smoking. The others charged. Darius dropped his rifle and drew his blade, meeting them head-on. He moved like a shadow, dodging their attacks with unnatural speed. His blade carved through armor, slicing through their weak points with perfect precision. Velis watched, stunned. Her warriors were not just losing. They were being dismantled. One warrior tried to flank Darius from behind. Without turning, he twisted his wrist and drove his blade backward, impaling his attacker without even looking. Varuk swallowed hard. My queen. He's reading their movements. He adapts. He fights like he's done this 1,000 times before. Velis felt something she had never experienced before. Fear. Darius cut down the last warrior, leaving the battlefield silent once more. 50 elite soldiers, gone. He looked up, directly at her. For the first time in her life, Velis felt like she was not the predator. She was the prey. The battlefield was silent. Queen Velis stood motionless, her breathing heavy. The cold wind carried the scent of blood and dust, but her mind was lost elsewhere. Darius Kane had defeated her, not just in battle, but in spirit. He had fought her, outmatched her, and then spared her. It made no sense. The auxiliary did not show mercy. Their warriors were trained to fight until the last breath, victory or death. But Darius had walked away. Velis clenched her fists, her claws digging into her palms. Her golden eyes burned as she turned to face him. He was still there, standing tall, his back to her. You mock me, she said, her voice low but dangerous. Darius stopped but did not turn around. No, he replied simply. I respect you. Velis felt something twist in her chest. Respect. From a human? You should have finished me, she snapped. That is the way of warriors. Darius let out a small breath. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Not my way. Velis stepped forward, her heart pounding. Then what is your way, human? Darius finally turned to face her. His eyes were calm, but his gaze was sharp. Survive. Adapt. Fight only when necessary. Velis scoffed. And yet you have killed so many of my people. You sent them to kill me, he countered, his voice steady. I don't fight for conquest. I fight because I have to. Something inside her shifted. This was not a mindless killer. This was a man who fought because the universe had given him no choice. For the first time, Velis felt doubt. For centuries, the auxiliary had believed themselves superior, stronger, smarter, unstoppable. And yet, this human had stood against an empire and survived. She stared at him for a long moment. You are different from the others. Darius smirked slightly. That's what makes us dangerous. Velis tilted her head. Us. Darius nodded. Humans. Her breath caught. The word felt heavy now. She had dismissed his kind as weaklings, myths, mere insects in the vast empire of the auxiliary. But now, standing before a warrior who had defied her expectations at every turn, she realized the truth. Humans were not weak. They were survivors, and that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. For the first time in her life, Queen Velis was afraid of what she did not understand. The auxiliary empire had conquered countless worlds, crushing resistance wherever it arose. Their queen, Velis, ruled with unmatched strength, believing her people were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. For centuries, they had mocked the stories of human warriors, calling them nothing more than exaggerated myths. Sitting upon her throne of obsidian and fire, Velis smirked as her generals spoke in hushed voices. They had received reports of an unknown warrior, a lone human, striking down auxiliary warbands with terrifying efficiency. But to the queen, it was impossible. Humans? She scoffed, resting her sharp-clawed fingers on the throne's armrest. They are weak creatures, fragile, emotional, easily broken. How can a single one stand against my elite warriors? Her Supreme General, Varric, hesitated before speaking. My queen, the reports. They are consistent. Our battalions in the outland sectors have suffered unexpected defeats. The survivors speak of a human mercenary, one who fights like a demon. His name is whispered in fear, Darius Kane. The name meant nothing to her. Another mercenary. Another fool who dared to stand against the Xilari Empire. Then send more troops, she ordered, waving her hand dismissively. Let this Darius Kane become another nameless corpse on the battlefield. But Varric remained uneasy. We have, my queen. Yet, no one returns. Silence fell over the grand hall. Even the alien flames that burned in the torches seemed to flicker uncertainly. Valus narrowed her golden eyes. How many have been lost? Varric hesitated before answering. Over 300 of our best soldiers, my queen. A murmur of disbelief spread through the chamber. Valus felt a flicker of irritation. 300. Slaughtered by one human. This was no ordinary warrior. This was something else. Still, she refused to believe it. The Xilari were the galaxy's most feared warriors. No single human could stand against them. Prepare another battalion, she commanded, her voice like steel. I will see this so-called warrior fall with my own eyes. Far away, on a war-torn planet, Darius Kane stood alone on the battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of fallen Xilari soldiers. His breathing was steady, his armor smeared with alien blood. He had faced monsters, warlords, and nightmares that would make most men tremble. Now, an entire empire was coming for him. He welcomed the challenge. The days that followed Darius Kane's arrival marked a turning point for the Xilari Empire. The city was abuzz with talk of the human warrior who had not only survived the might of the Xilari, but had been welcomed as an equal. The streets were filled with whispers, some of admiration, others of doubt. It was a new world for both the Xilari and the humans, a world where old rivalries were beginning to fade, replaced by uncertain alliances. Queen Valus stood at the balcony of the palace, watching the city below. She could feel the change in the air. The Xilari were a proud people, but pride alone could no longer carry them. She had opened the doors to peace, but she knew it would not be easy. There would be resistance. There would be those who fought against the shift, who could not accept that the empire could no longer be built on fear alone. But for the first time, Valus was not afraid. She turned as Darius entered the room, his usual calm expression replaced by a slight smile. You look like you're thinking about something big, Darius said, his voice light, but with a touch of concern. Valus raised an eyebrow. I am. Care to share? Darius asked, his posture relaxed, but his eyes serious. Valus paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. It's just, this empire was built on conquest, on strength. And now, I'm asking them to change, to see things differently. It's not easy for anyone. Darius nodded, stepping closer to her. Change never is. But you've already taken the hardest step, Valus. You've shown them that there's another way. The words felt like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. She had spent her life leading through strength, commanding her people with the expectation of loyalty and fear. But now she was building something new, something that would require patience, understanding, and above all, trust. Do you really think they'll follow? Valus asked, the doubt creeping into her voice. I think they'll follow you, Darius replied, his tone unwavering. They've already seen the power you have, not just as a leader, but as someone who's willing to learn. You've done what no one else could. You've shown them what true strength is. Valus looked at him, her heart swelling with something she couldn't name. For the first time, she realized that the human warrior she had faced on the battlefield was not just a soldier, but a catalyst, a force that had made her question everything she thought she knew. Then, it's time to lead them into a new era, Valus said, her voice firm and sure. A time where we build, not destroy. A time where we work together, not against each other. Darius smiled, stepping back. That's the spirit. But it won't be easy. There will be challenges. But if anyone can bring them together, it's you. The words settled in Vela's mind as she gazed out at the city once more. She knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. There would be obstacles, but she was no longer the queen who ruled through fear. She was the queen who would transform her people. Together, humans and Siluri would face the future. They would forge alliances, overcome differences, and rise as something stronger than either species had ever been alone. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Queen Velas knew that this was just the beginning of something truly remarkable. The days following their duel felt like an eternity to Queen Velas. The battle was over, but the war within her had only just begun. The Exilari warriors still waited for her orders, their eyes filled with doubt and curiosity. They had seen their queen face a human, and for the first time in centuries, they had witnessed their leader falter. Velas was no longer the same. She stood before her war council, her golden eyes reflecting the turmoil inside. The massive table was filled with her closest advisors and generals, each one waiting for her command. But she was silent, lost in thought. "My queen, we cannot stand idle forever," said General Varric, his voice firm. "We've suffered losses, yes, but it is time to regain our strength. The human mercenary can't be allowed to threaten our rule any longer." Velas didn't respond immediately. She knew that Varric's words were what the Empire expected, what everyone expected. To strike again, to take control. But after everything she had seen on the battlefield, after facing Darius Kane, her mind was clouded. She looked at Varric, then at the others in the room. They were waiting for her decision, but something inside her told her that the old way of doing things, the old way of conquering, was no longer the answer. "What if we don't strike back?" she asked, her voice steady but uncertain. The room fell silent. Varric's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, my queen? We cannot simply allow a human to defeat our warriors and live. If we do nothing, we lose all respect in the galaxy. The Exilari Empire will be seen as weak." Velas stood, pacing slowly around the table. "It's not weakness," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "It's understanding. Darius Kane showed me something I've never understood before. Humans fight for survival, not for power." "Survival?" Varric scoffed. "They are a threat, Velas. We cannot let this go." Velas stopped in her tracks, turning to face him. "I don't want to conquer anymore." The words were out before she could stop them, and as soon as they left her mouth, she felt the weight of them. For the first time in her life, Velas realized that the true power of the Exilari Empire wasn't in their weapons or strength. It was in their ability to adapt, to grow, to evolve. And humans, with their incredible will to survive, had shown her the way. The generals exchanged uncertain glances. The silence stretched, but Velas could see their minds turning. They were used to ruling with fear, with force, but she was no longer that ruler. She took a deep breath. "I will send a message to Darius Kane. The war is over." Varric looked at her, clearly shocked. "But my queen." She raised a hand, silencing him. "I am queen, and this is my decision. We don't need to destroy them. We can find a new way to live among them." The room was still. For the first time, Velas saw the true power in her leadership, not through war, but through understanding. As she looked at her generals, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in her life, she felt confident in the direction she was leading them. The Empire would change. The Exilari would change. And they would learn that sometimes survival means something greater than victory. And it was time to begin a new era. The battle raged on, their weapons clashing like thunder in the desolate wasteland. Queen Velas had never fought a warrior like this before. Every Exilari opponent she had ever faced relied on brute strength, overwhelming speed, or superior technology. But Darius Kane was different. He was not the strongest. He was not the fastest. Yet he was winning. His movements were unpredictable. He adapted. He learned. Valus struck high, her twin energy blades blazing with power, but Darius ducked, slipping beneath the attack with fluid precision. Before she could react, he twisted and aimed a sharp kick to her ribs, forcing her back. She stumbled but did not fall. Her golden eyes burned with frustration. And something else. Curiosity. This human was more than a warrior. He was a survivor. "You are stalling," she growled, circling him. "Why?" Darius flicked his blade, shaking off the heat from the last exchange. "I'm studying you." Valus narrowed her eyes. "Studying?" He nodded. "Solari warriors rely on instinct. You follow a pattern, even if you don't realize it." She felt a flicker of unease. "And?" Darius smirked. "And now I know how to beat you." Without warning,